We're here today in the País with Joseph Kaboski, who is the DF and Ernst Einstein Foundation Professor of the Department of Economics at the University of Notre Dame. He holds a PhD in economics from the University of Chicago and is the president of the Catholic Research Economics Discussion Organization. Hi, Joe. Welcome
Hi.
to the País.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. To start, can you tell us about your work as an economist and your academic interest?
Yeah, so I'm a growth and development economist, and I am somewhere between a macroeconomist and a microeconomist. I do kind of a mix of both. Actually, I had my graduate school advisors, one of them won the Nobel Prize for his contributions in microeconomics, and the other one for his contribution to macroeconomics. So I'm a little bit of a jack of all trades in terms of the research that I do, but it's usually on growth and development and international economics. And the topics that I study are finance and development, and especially microfinance, and structural change or structural transformation, which is the transition of economies from agrarian economies to industrial economies to service economies. And I do some work on trade, international trade, and then I have a sort of a side hobby and a teaching component, certainly Catholic social thought and the doctrine of the Church.
So then, given your Catholic background and the fact that you're the president of the Catholic Research Economics Discussion Organization, how do you think that economics discipline and the Catholic social thought can relate?
The first thing is it's actually quite difficult as they currently stand to relate, so it requires a lot of effort. We've organized conferences. The Society Credo grew out of a series of conferences that were started by Cardinal George, who was originally a professor of philosophy, but then he became the Cardinal of Chicago, and we were bringing bishops and theologians and economists together, and realized that even economists that go to church actively speak a very different language, and even theologians that were interested in policy. So it requires a lot of effort and a lot of trying to learn this common language. But I think that the synergy is that the church has a lot to teach, and the social doctrine has a lot to teach economists about sort of ethical principles, what the goals of the economy ought to be. And then the economists have a lot to teach the church about the practical ways of achieving those goals, or pursuing those goals at least. So I think that the conversations are very important.
And how would you say that these principles of the social doctrine of the Catholic Church have impacted your work?
The topics that I study, I mentioned that studying economic development, I'm concerned with poverty. That probably comes just from my Catholic upbringing. And not so much even having had an intellectual introduction to the social doctrine, but just to having a Catholic faith. But then the social doctrine of the Church kind of guides the things that I think are important, I guess, in terms of my research, and probably makes me a little bit broader in terms of how I interpret the results of my research and what I think is important for a good society. And then as a practical matter, I teach a course in economics and Catholic social thought. So my teaching is directly related to Catholic social thought. And we teach a course to graduate students and faculty, economics faculty, that is kind of we call it a boot camp, kind of where they learn the basics of the social doctrine.
So you mentioned some about your work, and we're interested in your research about microfinance initiatives. Do you think that microcredits as a tool for entrepreneurship in low-income sectors are good for poverty alleviation?
This is actually one of the things where I think the Church could learn from economists, because actually just 2 weeks ago in the document that was released by the Dicastery for Integral Human Development and the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith, they were very pro-microfinance. And a lot of the research in economics has been not anti-microfinance, but much more nuanced in terms of the impacts that microfinance can have. So most of the evaluations of microfinance have said as a broad-based poverty program, it's not very effective. The impacts of microfinance tend to be on particular populations that, those people that are really aspiring entrepreneurs and have ability to do so and already have businesses. That's where you see the impact of microfinance.
That sounds like some sort of characteristics of those people to show like results.
That's right. So the typical person maybe doesn't benefit so much from microfinance. And in fact, the typical person either borrows once from microfinance or zero. So they either never use the program, so they can't benefit directly, or they borrow once and then often regret getting into debt. So that's about microcredit. There's also things like microsavings and microinsurance, and those have a little bit broader impacts. And then some of my research has shown that the indirect effects of microfinance, when it's widely available, and finance in general, is to allow sort of more productive entrepreneurs to enter and start businesses. And what that does is sort of creates jobs for other people and raises the wages of even the people that don't want to become entrepreneurs. So these sort of secondary effects become important, but not if it's just a very small program. It has to be more widely available for that.
Do you think that economic and social development of countries should follow only conventional policies of economic growth, namely state programs or private incentives? Or do you think, or do you have a vision of non-conventional policies that are plausible ways to achieve development, such as the cooperatives that I mentioned, or the rise of non-profit organizations that, the role that civil society has in this matter?
Yeah. So I think that, my own view would be a three-pronged approach, which I think that the state plays a role, civil society plays a role, and the market plays an important role. I think cooperatives and nonprofit organizations play an important role and a growing role to some extent, even hybrid type of things where you have firms that are profit-seeking but also have a social mission. That's an increasing segment of the economy. But I'm a little bit resistant to ideas that this is kind of a model in the sense of that the private sector, just standard for-profit businesses, is, any country that's ever witnessed dramatic growth and dramatic escape from poverty has been driven overwhelmingly by private sector for-profit growth. So I think that that's we can't overemphasize cooperatives and nonprofits at the expense of not appreciating what the private sector itself does, the for-profit private sector does.
Can you extend on the role that civil society can have in the economic or social development?
How one understands civil society is a question. If you think of civil society narrowly as being, businesses that have a social mission or nonprofits, I think they play a role. They play a role in public charities play a role that government can't do because actual charity in the sense of caritas is hard for a government to actually conduct, but small organizations can do this in a subsidiary function. If we think of a broader role of civil society, meaning civil society incorporating all sorts of other social organizations and culture, then there's a huge role to play. In fact, one of the things that the church emphasizes, and I believe to be true, and I think there's evidence for it, is the culture, that the market economy rests on a culture of values that are needed for the market to play its role. And those can't come from the market alone. Right. They have to come from families, civil society, church institutions, government institutions. All these things play a role in establishing that culture and foundation.
I want to take an example that's happening in Chile, because a free market model has endured in Chile for quite some time. And it has allowed a significant economic growth in our country, bringing major progress for our society, for example, in infrastructure or improvement of public services. However, placing this economic model in the center of some complex areas like educational system creates incentives, in this case for the schools, to look for economic profits or to rely only on the results of standardized tests. That would derail its purpose from what should be the main goal of education, that is to promote a comprehensive human development and to enhance the personal skills of the students. So, in light of this problem, how can economic sciences contribute to focus on the formative role of education?
Yeah, education is a huge thing in that there are a lot of issues. There's a lot of issues with education, but there's also a lot of issues with privatized education. I know in Chile, for example, the incentives were for private universities, or what we would in the United States call kind of technical schools or community colleges, to enter into the market to making profit. But the incentives were also just to keep passing students along, whether they were learning something or not, just to get the funds. In the United States, we've gone to a voucher system, which allows for privatization, but also allows for Catholic schools to get public funds. I think that those have largely been positive. That's at the younger age levels. The issue that you brought up in terms of what's the broader role of education, is it only just for professional training and to be able to earn a living, or is it to be able to develop a person more broadly? I think almost every educator, and certainly a Catholic view of that, would be that it's the latter, it's this broader view, and Catholic schools help on that front. I think there's probably incentives, extra incentives in the private sector to only have this kind of money-making approach to education, but even in the public sector or publicly funded schools, and even in the Catholic schools, Notre Dame, for example, we face this pressure because the cost of schooling is going up. Parents want to make sure their kids get jobs, and that becomes a primary thing. So this is an area where civil society also has to play a role in sort of shaping the values, that we don't just value education for financial outcomes, but for this broader human element that it offers.
Right, because I'm thinking this very structural system, a very limited system, does not include, to give an example, students from art schools or liberal arts that don't contribute to the goal of this standardized test, or don't contribute to this profit that the schools or this schooling system is searching, you know?
Yeah.
And so this can create some sort of segregation between the students that, fit the system and don't fit the system.
Yeah. I mean, actually at Notre Dame we face this problem, which is that everybody wants to go to the business school. And Notre Dame was founded on the liberal arts education. It's a Catholic school. And so actually economics is in the School of Arts and Letters. And the reason it's in the School of Arts and Letters and is actually the dean's favorite department is because it allows people to have a double major. So they can major in theology or philosophy or literature, but they can also major in economics. And so they can do something that sort of broadens their life view, but also have as a fallback a degree in economics, so that the parents aren't worried that they won't be able to get a job if whatever they really like to do falls through. But again, that is an issue even at Notre Dame, which is a private school and a Catholic school, and not for profit. Anyway, this is kind of driven by what the demands of the economy are, and what the demands of the market are, and the price of education. It's enormous in the United States. I don't know how expensive things are here, or even how the financing is. It's rising. And it's an odd thing, because on some level, from an economic standpoint, the economy gets wealthier and wealthier. So you would think people would value the physical things that you can buy with money less relative to the things that you can't buy with money, which is appreciation for the broader humane knowledge that you'd get from a liberal arts education. But we don't see that happening, so that's a troubling. thing. I don't know a good solution for it. There's also, in terms of just what I mentioned before that the economy itself can't produce the culture that's needed, but there's also an issue with education. My wife is Korean, and Korea faces this problem, which is that their educational system is a testing-based system. And they actually can't produce the skills that the new economy needs, because the testing system is great for teaching people to learn certain information and the information they needed to adopt existing technologies. But now that Korea is a wealthy country, Chile is probably in the same boat, what's needed is actually being able to think creatively and be able to interact in groups cooperatively to create new ideas that provide for the future of the economy. And the skills that are needed there are much more of the skills that you get, I think, in a broader humanities training than just professional instruction.
So what would you say to young people who participate in public discussion and want to impact in this discussion without giving up their moral principles?
So I don't have much expertise in Chile, so I can talk about the United States because I teach young people at Notre Dame. And I think there is what are the challenges that people face, especially in public opinion, if you're a Catholic, is surrounding the family, which is the family is on fire, under attack. And so how can you support the family? And I think the same people that sort of challenge the role of the family in society are also very concerned about things like inequality and the relationships of people that no man is an island type of a thing. But a lot of the economic research shows that the rising inequality in the United States is associated in large part with the decline of the family. So in fact, most children in poverty, if you grow up in poverty in a single if you grow up in a single parent family where it's just a mother, you're 4 or 5 times more likely to be in poverty in the United States. So having strong families is very important in addressing things like inequality. And I think when you're young, it's difficult to appreciate the important role in society that the family plays, because you've just broken free from sort of your parents and you're yet to start your own family. So you may not value the family as much. And so it made it be not as cool among the young group of people to be so supportive of the family. In fact, schools, we talked about schools. There's nothing that, a huge part of your life is your family life. A huge part of my own happiness is my family, and nothing we ever learned in schools trains us to start families and to support families. But there's part of the faith that again you appreciate only with age, and there's another part of the faith that's the same part of the faith perhaps, but it's not always cool to be. When I was a kid, my mom had a bumper sticker. It said, "It's cool to be Catholic," and I was like a teenager. I was so embarrassed of that bumper sticker because it was obviously not the case that it was cool to be Catholic. But you're not always going to be cool to be Catholic, but sometimes your faith requires sacrifices. So I think that's something also you have to keep in mind.
It's also complicated because of this. The Catholic Church is also under attack, or continuously under attack. So for the young people, it's also difficult to raise the voice and place an argument from a Catholic point of view without being undermined because of it's a Catholic point of view and not like a secular point of view.
Yeah. But I think a lot of these arguments can be broadened in terms of broadened to appeal to both seculars and Catholics. I mentioned, people concerned with inequality in the United States. That's not often the most religious element, for example. But once you see a link between the family and inequality, then people can appreciate the role of the family, for example. But I think it's also important as we sort of try to improve our terminology to appeal to a broader base, that we also remember that it's deeper than just the secular language that we use. Thank you very much, Idea País, for having me today. And I very much enjoyed this conversation, and good luck with all of your work in the future.